ETM Hotel Berini Sean, welcome in peace. My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning into today's show. You could be anywhere else or have something else going on in the world. You could be a part of a whole nother discussion, whether it's, intelligent or otherwise. So, for everybody that will join this show live or maybe catch the show afterwards, I hope this is a learning lesson. So just bear with me one moment. I do want to let me see, I get this thing set up and then we can get into today's discussion presentation. All right, I do see it's a few people in the chat. So peace to everybody in the chat. And let me get my screen sharing right now. I know it's a more entertaining show going on right now, Uh, everybody ain't built for this, but they like to be entertained by the curious thoughts of astral projecting. Like really, like science hasn't debunked that already. Like science has falsified that. So when somebody says, "Have you done the study? Why are we why are we dealing with a study that has already been falsified and math and logic does not prove it?" But hey, let me get into this history, man. That's what I want to talk about. I got a whole headache behind it. Just being real. So I do see my screen is sharing. Let me get my stuff set up. Let's rock. All right. Today's conversation follows an article that I have written uh and shared. It's a lot of views actually. I hope people actually read it. It's got a lot of viewership, but I hope people actually read the article that I wrote about the American Negro Society. And this follows up that article. Um, if you're unfamiliar with it, let me see if I can get it and drop it in a chat real quick. And I hope everybody is doing well. Do, 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 do. Hold on, y'all. I'm Dolo, by the way. I thought I shared it, but now people are, you know, to hang out to dry. I'll post it later, man. Let me just get into this because I don't want to hold nobody up, man. It's a whole new day. People can deal with that. All right, so we're gonna talk about the rise and fall of the American Negro Academy. Like I said earlier, I actually had um, presented this information before. So, Kofi, you here? Or you got on and got off? Oh, I put the wrong. Okay, cool. Kofi talking about the link don't work. He do this every time, y'all. Kofi, you have to copy. You have to copy the Hangout link and post it in an old group, and then go in from there in order to get on because it's gonna continue to say broken link. All right, let me get into it. It should have played automatically though, but whatever.
Five, four, three, two, one.
All right, let's get it in. During the last 2 decades of the 19th century, Black Americans experienced a relentless attack on their social, political, and economic rights. This resulted in a decline in their status throughout the United States, especially in the South, where slightly less than 90% of them live. Beginning in 1890, measures designed to disenfranchise blacks began to be written into the Constitution of Southern states, and by 1910, most blacks had been eliminated as voters. If if was in this same period that racial segregation or Jim Crow ideas began to be translated into law and steadily extended to all areas of life in the South. Theoretically, facilities for both races were to be equal. In practice, this was never so, and blacks were forced to accept inferior services and accommodations or none at all. Throughout these years, the white American intellectual community failed to challenge the increasing political, social, and economic displacement of black Americans, and in numerous instances reinforced these trends. In the 1890s, there was a marked increase in anti black publications. Many of these books, articles, and essays were the product of Southern efforts to strip blacks of political power, both real and potential, and to restrict them to the bottom of the social order. But as Rayford Logan has accurately observed, the effort was facilitated by the respectability of racist thought in all sections of the country. Africans have long been acquainted with various strands of what has been termed scientific racism. This involved use of anthropology, Egyptology, craniology, phrenology, biblical criticism, ethnology, and autonomy to prove the inferiority of blacks and other non Caucasians. The white Protestant churches, which in this period dominated America's religious life, provided little assistance or support for Black Americans. The churches, like the American intellectual community, were also the inheritors and, in many ways, the perpetrators of a racist tradition. Theirs, however, rested on a scattered series of biblical and theoretical interpretations. Conditioned by its history as a religion whose members were almost all white, and its proclivity for becoming culturally and intellectually identified with a particular nation of group, Protest, excuse me, Protestantism, Protestantism often had little capacity or willingness to include other races within its worldview. The hostility towards blacks that ran through so much American life was clearly reflected in the country's circulating religious newspapers and magazines, as well as in the serious literature of the period. Not surprisingly, Southern white newspapers were especially blatant in their hostility and condescension toward blacks. Derogatory, jocular, derisive stories and stereotypes demeaning and insults to blacks regularly appeared in their pages, while editorial support was usually given both to the various devices for disenfranchising blacks and to the cause of white supremacy, which often involved implicit approval of lynching. At the same time, the opinion that Southern white man is the Negro's best friend was repeatedly expressed. Blacks who expected Northern press to be more sensitive to their plight and supportive of their cause were often sorely disappointed. Their articles and feature stories usually differed little from those printed in the South and frequently depicted blacks as violent, criminally inclined, comic, pretentious, and super sensitive. By the mid 1880s, blacks of all classes in the North as well as the South were coming to feel that the intense and implacable hostility of whites left them no alternative but to accept a separate existence apart from a larger American community. Many continued to protest and agitate for all their rights as citizens, but possibly of halting their exclusion had to be acknowledged. Confronted with this situation, Black Americans began to pour their energies into the creation of culture, welfare, religious, educational, economic, and social institutions that would be counterparts to the ones from which whites barred them. Educated blacks who constituted less than 3% of their racial community took the lead in efforts to establish new institutions that would meet the needs of their people. During the last 2 decades of the 19th century, they participated in the formation of religious organizations and racial defense associations. These same men and women also led an establishment of cultural, learned, and professional societies, groups that in many ways were a direct expression of their identities and need for affirmation. Here are a list of some of the professional Negro societies that were established from the 1880s to the early 1900s. The Color Press Association, Bethel Literary and Historical Association, Society for the Collection of Negro Folklore, National Federation of Afro-American Women, National League of Colored Women's Club. The two women's societies were merged after competing and forming the National Association of Colored Women and the American Negro Historical Society. Beginning in the 1880s, a number of American ethnic groups had begun to establish cultural and learned societies. Many of them, despite the fact that their purposes and activities were more far ranging, were called historical societies, and most, even those that exhibited a serious historical interest, were also group defense and propaganda organizations. Several factors stimulated their establishment. A lot of what stimulated the growth of these organizations was inspired by the amount of immigrants entering America during a 40-year span. Nearly 14 million immigrants entered the United States, and a lot of different cultural influences began to sprout up. The Jews, Italians, Slavs, Magyars, natives, and Germans all confronted the cultural differences by forming organizations, societies to impact Western ideology and its influence on their existence in history. So this was a time when other cultures were coming into or migrating into the United States. And because of Western ideology and historical perspectives and so forth, these immigrants from these other places began to disseminate themselves from, that's not the right word, but to segregate themselves from the Western ideology and form small think tanks and groups to combat misinformation that came out of Western ideology to the rest of the world. The idea of establishing a national black culture organization was first proposed in 1873 when delegates attending the National Equal Rights Convention passed a resolution urging the formation of Black Historical Society. The resolution produced no results, though the various literary and debating societies beginning to flourish in the black community heard papers on historical themes, observed the births and deaths of black heroes and white friends, and in other ways sought to focus their members the culture and history of their race. In 1883, the black historian George Washington Williams issued another call for the formation of a black historical society. Look up George Washington Williams. I hope y'all got y'all pen and pad because there's going to be some name droppings and you can kind of look these people up and get an actual understanding of who these people were and why they are important to you today. After the call was put out for the formation of a historical society, one of the most prominent people of the 1890s, Alexander Crummell, answered. Crummell, a man of 74 in 1893, was a towering figure in the black community. Alexander Crummell's name is hardly a household word. Unlike his more celebrated contemporary Frederick Douglass, Crummell did not leave a legacy of 3 autobiographies, nor was he given to publicizing himself through the retelling of thrilling autobiographical incidents. Crummell's adventures certainly contain enough colorful material to have made a thrilling and engaging narrative, but he was not the brilliant impresario that Douglass was. Neither did he possess the clever optimism and spirit of enterprise of William Brown, who referred to him as punctilious. Crummell's personality is not always easy to bear. The logic of his discourse, if often unfamiliar to us, although it is systemic and consistent within the worldview that he espoused. From the time Crummell committed himself to the idea, initiative shifted to him and a small group of Washington, D.C., whom he gathered to help him plan the organization. On the evening of December 1896, Crummell met with 4 men. I'm going to go through this slow. One of the 4 men, or the 4 men were John Wesley Crummell. Write that down. Paul Lawrence Dunbar. Write it down. Walter B. Hasten. Write that down. And Kelly Miller. Write that down. To invite their support and cooperation on the subject. Please write the name. Anytime you hear me say a name, just jot it down for your reference so that you can review who these people were and how prominent they were in the early stages of what I consider to be the wave of information at in that era. Crummell presided at the meeting, which took place at John W. Crummell's home. The elderly clergyman explained the purpose of the gathering, inviting the 4 men to join him in establishing a Black Learned Society. He also shared with them an 8-article constitution he had written. In this brief document, the proposed society, called the African Academy, was described as an organization of colored authors, scholars, and artists. Now, originally the name was, remember this, the original name was African Academy. Crummell offered the following set of goals: to promote the publication of literary and scholarly works, to aid youths of genius in the attainment of the higher culture at home and abroad, to gather into its archives valuable data, historical or literary works of Negro authors, to aid by publications the vindication of the race from vicious assaults in all the lines of learn and truth, to publish, if possible, at least once a year, an annual of original articles upon various literary, historical, and philosophical topics of a racial nature by selected members, and by these and diverse other means to raise the standard of intellectual endeavor among American Negroes. In the terms of membership, Crummell was very precise. The society was to be limited to 40 persons and open only to graduate or professors in colleges. Literary characters, authors, artists, and distinguished writers, in order to qualify for election, suitable candidates had to be recommended by six enrolled members and receive the approval of two-thirds of the total membership. Once admitted, the new member would pay an entry fee, as this was to be decided by the total membership once the organization was underway. Later in this presentation, we're going to come back to this particular point, that this organization was only designed for professors, graduates, or professors from college. Remember that, okay? That would mean that the autodidactic didn't have a play in the creation of this organization or a role whatsoever. Following the example of other learned societies, Cromwell's constitution permitted the Academy to invite colored authors and writers, members, and others to submit papers for criticism and judgment. If the membership deemed them worthy, they were to be published under the organization's name. Provision was also made for an annual meeting in Washington, D.C., and the final article, an obvious frown at academic pretension, forbid the use of titles or degrees by Academy members in its publications. The members would then deliberate and discuss expectations and organizational plans. After the dialogue, they all agreed that Cromwell's proposal would be accepted as the foundation, and only one change was made to the organization, and that was the name of the society. Hence, the creation of American Negro Academy. The original name would have been African and not American. Like a number of blacks born before the Civil War, Cromwell made frequent use of the word African when referring to himself or his people, a habit which his years in Liberia had probably reinforced. Moment of clarity. Regarding the name change from African to America was a political move at a time Dunbar suggested Black Americans was moving away from the word African and adopting the word Negro. Dunbar argued that the term Negro expressed a sense of racial pride and included Black Americans of all colors and backgrounds. Months later, the gentlemen would meet again, this time asking 4 other Washingtonians to join them as Academy members and organizers: Francis Gramsci, John A. Johnson, John Love, and Albert Miller. All offered something valuable to the creation of the Academy. Everyone had something in common with the other: a group of like-minded individuals who would align themselves with the responsibility to move the agenda of the ANA forward. But first, the new members would have to be read the Constitution and meet the academic requirements, which they all met. Other notable scholars would join afterwards, such as Du Bois, Scarborough, and E.A. Clark. The ANA got busy recruiting and organizing its members before introducing themselves to the world. Once Alexander Cromwell decided it was an imperative necessity that a society to encourage Black intellectual activity and defend the Negro race to be established, distinguished public role and lengthy experience as an organizer had made Gramsci and Krogman almost instinctively turn to him for advice and encouragement when they first began to discuss such an organization. And because he was also a dominating personality, his commitment to the idea led to his becoming master of it. On March 5th, 1897, the 127th anniversary of the Boston Massacre, where Cripkus Attucks, who was believed to have been a mulatto, was first to die, 18 Black men assembled in the District of Columbia Lincoln Memorial Church to formally inaugurate the American Negro Academy. This date was chosen because it recalled an event especially sacred to the Negro. To the men who planned the meeting, Attucks' death in 1770 was a symbol of the patriotic and heroic role Black Americans played in the creation of the United States. Consequently, they felt it appropriate that a Black society formed to encourage intellectual activity among Blacks, and to defend them from the vicious assaults should begin its public life on this day. I have a follow-up presentation, just a small one, dealing with the Attucks. It's a little bit more information to elaborate on that. The 9 men who initiated the ANA invited 46 other members to the organizational meeting in Washington, D.C. Although the ANA proceedings indicated the points at which 43 of these invites were nominated, approved, and extended invitation at some point between February 15th and March 5th, 3 others, John Wesley Hoffman, Theophilus J. Minton, and Samuel L. Williams, must also have been extended invitations. When the organizational meeting took place on March 5th, 1897, the 9 members were all present and a total of 18 attended the first annual meeting. Remember, 40 something was sent out invitations. In this meeting, talks about the agenda would and state of the American Negro would be discussed. Crummell's talk was a discourse on the need of the American Black civilization and the ANA's crucial role in fostering it. In support of his arguments, he drew on ideas and attitudes held by many, if not most, educated blacks regarding the conditions of the Black Americans and Black-white relations. To Crummell, civilization was a state of being derived from an acquaintance with and a commitment to Christianity and the intellectual discipline. In his several related definitions of the term, he described it as the action of exalted forces, both of God and man, and as a type of force, which in the loftiest man bursts forth, producing letters, literature, science, philosophy, poetry, sculpture, architecture, and all the arts, and as the expression of intellectual philanthropic concern. A race was therefore to be considered civilized only when it produced a sophisticated and regenerative culture of its own. So a civilization doesn't exist to Crummell unless you can produce something. That's what he just said. So again, the primary focus was on producing letters, literature, science, philosophy, poetry, sculpture, architecture, all the arts, and the expression of intelligent philanthropic concern. It was important to remember, Crummell continued, that the creation of a true and lofty race could only result from the force of application of higher arts. There was no shortcut to this condition via industrial education, business success, land ownership, political power, or social and sexual intermingling with whites. For these were not fixed factors in so large a thing as the destiny of man. A cultivated moral intelligence was the only force able to enter life of a people, uplifting the crudeness of laws, giving scientific precision to morals and religion, stimulating enterprise, extending commerce, creating manufactures, expanding mechanisms and mechanical inventions, producing revolutions and reforms, humanizing labor, meeting the minutest human needs. The ANA, Crummell told his listeners, was an organization whose purpose was to translate these understandings into programs and actions that would touch the lives of blacks. For this reason, he was deeply encouraged by the enthusiasm with which a number of educated blacks held the academy. One of the most important things that took place at the ANA's organizational meeting was an attempt by the 18 participants to develop a common perspective on the meaning and purpose of the Black presence in America. The consciousness that educated and thoughtful members of the race needed to address themselves more precisely and aggressively to the task of rebutting racist attacks could only serve as the beginning point for justifying the association. In order to sustain itself, to say nothing or attempting the many tasks outlined in its constitution, the ANA needed an intellectual framework through which it could devise answers to questions concerning the racial identity of Black Americans, their role in predominantly white society, and the relationship to Blacks in Africa and other parts of the world, Pan-Africanism. The men who planned the meetings recognized how important it was for the organization to wrestle with these questions. No one was more aware of this than Crummell, whose opening address represented his response to this need. In part, the topics assigned to A.P. Miller and Du Bois also were intended to raise these questions for a group consideration. Excuse me. By the end of the meeting that evening, a lot was accomplished and the work of the ANA moving forward had been assigned to its members. From that point forward, these scholars would produce tons of writing, articles, journals, essays, and some even books. Information would immediately become shared throughout the states as well as other countries via newspapers. Racist white editors and writers was put on notice and no longer could control the narrative of how blacks were being viewed within it being challenged. However, the ANA didn't get the attention it thought it had generated. All in all, the Academy received small attention from the press, scarcely any from white papers, and with a few exceptions, only the most cursory notice from the black publications. So black people weren't even paying attention. Besides the Washington Post, no major paper in either racial community discussed the ANA and non-speculated editorial as to its future. Sadly enough, this was true of the two black papers in Washington, newspapers in Washington. It was quite possible that if Fortune had no attacked the organization, excuse me, Fortune had no attack attached to the organization, it would have gotten even less publicity. The members were extremely disappointed, but remained convinced that it was a significant achievement to have established the organization and published two papers, which, as Crummell observed in December 1897, had been noticed in Europe, Africa, and the West Indies, as well as in America. Now, as time would pass, more meetings would be held and new ideas would be discussed as well as new opportunities for the ANA. Crummell aged and decides that it would be in the best interest of the Academy to elect new young blood to help run the organization. He would continue to be influential, however. New juice would be exceptionally encouraged. Members would vote on who would be qualified to take on the presidency, and requirements would be made to honor that by a majority vote. Some would argue their candidates based on recent scholarly work produced. Others would cling to a more comfortable approach by just selecting the current president due to avoiding new obstacles. New members would continue to join as the organization will hold steadfast for over 30 plus years. Many scholars did not expect, for the ANA to last as long as it did. Now, this is all from my perspective I'm writing here, not a source. Members will come and go based on personal requirements and new responsibilities with other organizations, which would lead to what caused the fall of the ANA, possibly. Membership would diminish over the years, as did a host of responsibilities that went along with being a member, but ultimately the ANA's success outweighs its endings. The history of the American Negro Academy makes it clear that in many ways the organization failed to achieve its goals. I'm giving you the good and bad, and I don't care if you like it. Efforts to promote publication of scholarly work had only minor success. During approximately 31 years of existence, the Academy, through its 22 occasional papers, presented a total of 31 articles to the public, the longest of which was 38 pages. And of the articles published, some cannot be called scholarly. Nothing was done to aid youths of genius in the attainment of the higher culture at home or abroad, either program, but it failed to promote the work of unknown youths of ability or to assist their entry into institutions of higher education. The work of establishing an archive was not begun until 1908, 11 years after the formal inauguration of the society. However, despite the enthusiastic interest of several members, the collection grew slowly, never had a permanent home, and lacked funds for maintenance. The demise of the Academy also led to the disappearance of the archives, which may have been returned to donors or kept by one of the members or distributed amongst several members. The organization fell short of achieving its goals in other areas. Every effort to secure funds to publish an annual containing essays, literature, reprints of historical documents, and general information and statistics on the Black American community was unsuccessful. And despite the fact that occasional papers were responses and challenges to racist views, they were ignored by most whites who were seriously interested in the Black Americans. This lack of interest, as well as the ANA's inability to either secure the funds to strengthen its publishing efforts or have its members' papers published by white journals, was a direct result of white America's conscious and unconscious rejections of the American Negro Academy's validity as a learned society and of its members' uh, claims to intellectual. Despite the strong belief on the part of the member of the ANA founders and members that the organization should have strong ties with distinguished blacks in other parts of the world, besides the election of 12 corresponding members, little was done to make this a reality. In fact, after 1912, by never again electing another corresponding member, the society demonstrated an inability to maintain the validity of the symbolic commitment to its goals. From 1912 to 1928, it was the activities of individual members that kept the memory of this goal alive. One being the last president, his name was Arthur Schomburg. Although the failure of the Academy to achieve certain of its goals and its limited success in regard to other kept the organization weak, leading ultimately to its decline and disappearance. The society did accomplish a number of things, which are tributes to the tenacity and the dedication of its committed members. An organization of Black American authors, scholars, artists, and those distinguished in other walks of life for the promotion of letters, science, and art was constituted and maintained its existence for approximately 32 years. During that time, the Society published and distributed 22 occasional papers that contain ideas, opinions, statistics, and historical information directly contradicting the popular belief among whites that all blacks were incapable of benefiting from higher education and devoid of intellectual sophistication, had never played a significant or positive role in American history, or reconciled to their position of economic, political, and social inferiors in the land of their birth. The positive reactions by a small circle of thoughtful blacks and whites to several of the country's major libraries and institutions of learning strengthened the society's belief in educational possibilities of pieces written by blacks discussing ideas and issues of importance to them and their race. The publication of occasional papers also encouraged other Academy members whose papers were not published, as well as blacks outside the organization, to continue their efforts to have their research and opinions on a wide range of subjects published in the form of articles and books. The failures and successes of the Academy made clear the many obstacles which confront members of the Black intelligentsia, who during the late 19th and early 20th century sought to influence the world of ideas and discussions of major social questions to obtain legitimization from the Black and white communities for their work as intellectuals and to provide forms of institutional support for themselves. However, to fully appreciate the historical significance of the ANA, it is also necessary to evaluate it as an expression of a particular strategy for dealing with the problems of Black Americans and to assess its relationship to those ideas and movements that made the great impact of the Black community from 1897 to 1929. The American Negro Academy, the first of their major Black learned society, was a unique organization. Prior to its establishment, the Black American community had no institution comparable to it. The ANA's failure and its ultimate collapse say much about the historical forces within both the Black and white communities that have frustrated the efforts of educated Blacks to influence the American scholarly community and to translate their thought on major questions into political and social policy. Its few successes and the various scholarly achievements of the individual members are a testament to the sheer determination and ingenuity of educated Blacks who, in the face of crushing discouragements, remain fascinated by the ideas and the relevance to the practical problems. Perhaps the real wonder in the history of the ANA is that the organization was able to exist as long as it did. Here are some notable presidents of the Academy outside of course, the founder. W.E.B. Du Bois, Archibald Gramsci, and of course, the great Mr. Schomburg. Publications that analyze the effects of racism. You had the disenfranchisement of the Negro by J.L. Lowe. You had the early Negro conventions by Mr. Cromwell. You have comparative study of the Negro problem by Charles C. Cook. And then, of course, by Schomburg, you have the economic contributions by the Black Negro. And then you have the status of the free Negro from 1860 to 1870 by William Pickens. Admission fees into the academy. Of course, every academy or society has some type of admission fees or something to kind of keep it afloat. As you seen in the presentation, there was a struggle to keep finances astute so the publications wouldn't get published all the time. Various things had to happen. But this is one of the reasons that I asked the question the other day about are we using social media correctly, or are we abusing or misusing the opportunity? Is because check this out. The admission fees to the academy was $5, including the first annual fee, and members should be assessed annually $2. Failure in payment of this or any other obligations voluntarily assumed for 2 years should cause memberships to cease. Special assessments may be made for publications. So most people struggle to pay admission fees and or their annually fees at a time that $2 was probably more so like $20 or $30. And it's bad because you had a lot of great minds that went into the influence and the creation of such a great astute academy that some people couldn't pay $2. This is a little fun fact by our dear brother True Story in the MBK. I couldn't do anything like this without allowing him to be able to bless it. And we had a conversation yesterday evening where he was reviewing a video that I had made. Where, like I told you, if I make any errors, he watching. I know he gonna correct it. So we were, I let him know what I was doing today, and he hit me with this nice fun fact. So I decided to put this out. Now he's going to elaborate on this, but I told him that I was inclined to add it to the presentation originally because that's what he was encouraging me to do at the time. But I was like, nah, man, we need you to build on it. So look forward to some more information about this. But John Edward Bruce, also known as Bruce Grit, they called him Grit back in the day, was an American journalist, historian, writer, orator, civil rights activist, and Pan-African nationalist. He was born a slave in Maryland, United States, but later during his adult life, he founded numerous newspapers along the East Coast, as well as a co-founder with Mr. Schomburg, the Negro Society for Historical Research in New York. But here's the important part about Grit. Grit was the link and glue between the autodidactic and the college graduates. No Bruce, no Harlem History Club. That means no Dr. Ben or John Henry Clark. It started in his house first, not the YMCA. To add to what True Story said, because he also did say this, and this is kind of summarize what he said. But early in the presentation, remember the organization was only open to graduates and professors from college. It didn't have anything to do with the autodidact. But Grit was an intricate part in the form in orchestrating all these household ideas and some of these learned societies because he was linking them together. Mr. Schomburg, who was a president of the American Negro Academy, the last president, by the way, was an autodidact. He wasn't a professor. He was from the islands. That was another problem. And he was also what some would consider or argue about, like a mulatto or something. Here's a primary source. This is from the March 5th, which you heard me mention several times. And if you read my article, this was in the article. This is crumble here, and this is the founder and the first president, and this is the organization plans. And below of the organization, there are the 18 members that actually attended the first meeting, the organized meeting. And it is here that you also see what I say in the presentation. And I'm gonna read it for some of y'all because it may be difficult to read. It says this academy is an organization of authors, scholar, artists, and those distinguished in other walks of life. Men, because at this time they didn't do women into the organization. Men of African descent. This is key. They said men of African descent for the promotion of letters, science, and art, for the creation, as far as possible, of a form of intellectual taste, for the encouragement and the assistance of the youth, but hesitate scholarship, for the stimulation. Hold on, I can't see it. Stimulation of invertive, and it's kind of messed up on the end, powers, and for the promotion of the publication of works and merit. So you see all the names right there. Like I said, this is in my article. Maybe a clear picture you can see. This is what the ballot looked like for people who were uh, joining or were trying to join. You were voting, and earlier in the presentation, I remember I mentioned the process for that voting process. So the ballot will look like this. It'll say the ballot of the American Negro Academy. It'll have the applicant, then it'll have a stamp name. All the members will get one. Those who are for him or against him. So you would circle one or the other. You would sign and date, and then they would gather those. So it says to place a cross X before him or against him to indicate the direction of your choice. So if you form, then you would just put an X on against him. There's another primary source. This is the 7th annual meeting of the American Negro Academy, and it tells you where it was held, which goes back to True Historian's point that we use the YMCA for a lot of meetings because this was actually held at a YMCA building, and it gives you the program itinerary below. And these meetings usually last all day, 10:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. They had people going, so they probably started early and late. And and most of these people have that preaching mentality in them, so I'm pretty sure they went over a few times until the wee hours of the AM. Here's another primary source. It's the itinerary for the 8th annual meeting. I could have did this for all of them. But you have, basically this was more of an event here at this one because this gives us the 3-day event or whatever, Thursday, Friday. Well, Thursday and Friday events, and I think they did something on Saturday. So it kind of go from there. And here is the American Negro Academy. This is another primary document. This is pretty much like the constitutional articles that were actually written. And at this time, yep. As you can see, it doesn't give all the articles, but it on this particular page go all the way down to 6. It's a newspaper clipping about the American Negro Academy. The session here elected the following officers: President W.B. Du Bois, Vice President Kelly Miller, and so forth. This is basically what was published when Du Bois actually had took the helm of becoming president, and then the other one, the other people that were elected will precede him. Here are my actual sources. You can screenshot this, take a picture of this. A lot of the imagery will come from digitalcommonwealth.org. They have a lot of primary sources on the American Negro Society. Before we get into the bill, let me run through this little video, and if we need to backtrack, we can.
Ancestors got it. Paid a fair price. They take it, took everything else. History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells of people where they have been, what they have been, where they are, what they are. Like a warrior. Walk like a warrior. Walk like a warrior. Walk like a warrior. I ain't talking about no hustler. I ain't talking about no gangster. I'm hollering at the soldier. Revolutionary culture. Bang on out.
All right, so that actually concludes the presentation. I seen the Kofi them and John, Tech and all of them. Anybody got anything to say, man? The floor is yours.
Nothing, but I'm gonna have to go back and watch some of it because I've been trying to get in through. I'm on my phone. I can't get in. I couldn't get in through my lab now. One of my laptops. I'm gonna have to go back and look at some of. I don't know what it is when you go live. I can't never get in there.
Yeah, cause you creating the when you create the hangout, I had to do it too. I copy and paste the link into an old hangout so I can come through. But yeah, I see brother Sneb dropping his signs in the chat. Um, yep, he right. He said early That's my argument is that I made the other day, man. I'm sticking to that argument. It's the early conscious community. Yep. And he said Cromwell also assisted in the founding of the Bethel Literary and Historical Society in 1881. Mm-hmm. So they'll be on it, man. So really what I wanted to say, just based on when I doing the research and reading the book and gathering up the information, man, on this particular presentation, I noticed a few things that resemble what we call the conscious community today. Outside of the foolery, just from organizing and the lack of funds and published work that goes ignored, unread, or some published works that ain't even fact checked. Um, and doing this presentation, it just dawned on me that um, we haven't learned from the American Negro Academy at all. Like we're not. We have basically we have two sets of intellectuals now. The American Negro today, and I'm not including our brothers and sisters abroad yet. I'm just speaking here. So from our current conditions, we have the bourgeoisie intellectual, and then we have the conscious intellectual, right? And then you have those who lack the awareness or so-called consciousness, who are separate from the bourgeoisie intellectual. But then we have the conscious intellectual, and then we have the pseudo intellectual, is what I would call the other side of that, to equal the state out. So the non-bourgeoisie and the bourgeoisie intellectual, and then the conscious and pseudo conscious. if I'm saying that correct. Anybody can correct me, man. I'm not above correction at all.
So let me ask the bourgeoisie intellectual, as you say, and the conscious intellectual. Would you equate that to like no disrespect to anybody, but Dr. Issa and Truth Historian, that little situation they had?
Man, that's a great point. Yes, I would argue that because I would argue from a perspective of if anyone who watched that exchange that we saw it take place because I know that you saw the same thing I saw where we were just bystanders and we could sit there and observe it. You have Issa going on a tangent, and then you had him trying to belittle Trustorian and his intelligence because he was trying to use his doctrine or his degree, so to say, and whatever else he was trying to use to belittle Trustorian, like what Danny was saying was incorrect, and that was like I was like, no, Trustorian is right here. I don't care how many degrees you got or whatever you got going on, brother. He's right. So we got to see the bourgeoisie intellectual and the conscious intellectual on display. Absolutely, uh, dealing with that. But the problem is that we're trying to build a bridge and close the gap on the state of ignorance among all black people. But the conscious intelligence is the only one that's really trying to shrink that difference. You see what I'm saying? Because they're not adapting to or accepting of this "are you smarter than me" mentality. They're like, the hell with how smart you are. This is the problem. Can we fix it? Yeah, another one today. If I answered that one right.
Right, right. Yeah, I feel you. I just wanted to clarify that because I seen that and man, that sounded kind of crazy. Man. I mean, it's kind of like 'cause he didn't have no letters in a certain topic that he couldn't talk to Dr. East. Like, and I just thought that was crazy. Man. That didn't make no sense. What did that have to do with your information being accurate or inaccurate? You know what I mean? I don't know.
Right. Well, to be honest, to be honest, this isn't the first time. Black bourgeoisie intellectual has done this before because they did not respect the autodidact because they didn't go to college or graduate from college and was lettered in a particular field. We saw this in the American Negro Academy, whereas a person like Grit, who was the glue between merging the two, people didn't respect. Like uh, Brother Danny would argue that Schomburg was belittled in a sense by the earlier on by the American Negro Academy because his written work was not being accepted and published. You see what I'm saying? That he was sending in, they wouldn't respect it. And then Cromwell also had this bias of you had to be straight African. The mulatto, he wouldn't accept you in any shape, way, form, or fashion. He would argue against you, or he would try to pit one against the other as far as membership in not siding with the mulatto version or whatever. But that was a stickler in this. Uh, I didn't put everything in the presentation because I did want to build on it after the case. So based on the information, there was a lot of things That's why I'm equating the two. There was a lot of things that I saw that were problems that exist with us today. Oh, I'm smarter than you. Oh, I know more than you. Oh, you don't know this, so you can't talk about this because you're not lettered in it. Oh, I don't care if you read such and such books. That don't mean that you know what I know based on my research and my background and my degrees that I have. So you would see that then. These are intricate pieces. So you had funding, you had egos, you had you had lack of public acceptance. You had the people at a time that black people needed to come together and to get this information out. You had a rejection from the lack of intelligence on both the conscious side and unconscious side of any of this information. Praying, wishing, and hoping, praying to Jesus and going to church was the only solution. There was no other real time solution. And then this thought of prayer without works is dead. So this thought of the works was going to church. So you would pray and then your work would be go to church. That mentality handicapped us in a sense. So and these in formulating these societies, they still were church going people. The church were very influential in this particular aspect of what was going on. I'm not saying that or dumbing it down. What I'm saying is some people just did not gravitate toward liberating their mental state, their consciousness, at the same time trying to fight the good fight to move people forward. So you have this lack of thereof. I'm gonna give you another example of the problems that we actually have. Look at look at what's the dude name that does the Facebook show that was on CNN, then he got kicked off, then he was on MSNBC, the little fat chubby bald head dude in the Washington area. The he ain't really just fully bald headed, but he got the bald spot in the front. What's his name, man? God, he's a news broadcaster. Somebody got to know this guy. Oh man, ain't nobody helping me.
I got you, Sean. You talking about O'Reilly?
Is that his name?
Bill O'Reilly.
No, the black dude, the black dude.
Oh, I don't know his name.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, because when I'm talking about this black intelligentsia or the what you Seneb, what they call the bourgeoisies at the time. I know you got to catch up to that. Not Juan Williams. The dude now, man, he golly. His name, his name,
Cornell.
not Cordell. He in the news right now, but he be doing some stuff on Facebook where he have a little panel of 4 black people that'll come up there and they be talking about everything going on. He talk about the ADOS and man, hold on. Let me see. Y'all gotta know this dude, man. He is the perfect example of part of the problem. Um, Especially when we had these differences, because he sit there one day and he talked all about the conscious community, and he had an argument with uh Roland Martin. Roland Martin, y'all. He's a great example of intelligentsia, the academic world coming at the autodidact. You know what I mean? Like they feel this notion of prestige over you. So they feel that their way is the only way to be able to to solve a lot of complex problems, so to say. Um, Man, I don't even deal with Roland Martin and there, but some people take a liking to what he says. But yeah, that's his name, Roland Martin. He's a good example of that exchange, because I've seen him have an exchange. Like when he did the little Umar situation. I wasn't for Umar going on there. He looked stupid and all of that, but you could see that kind of play out in a sense. Uh as well, even though that wasn't a good example. But we, as though when I say we, I'm saying those of us who are trying to liberate the African mind and also be active in our own communities and doing the things that we're actually doing as as you know what we consider to be pan-Africanists in our perspectives and otherwise, because I know a lot of people want to say ADOS, but which I don't even care about any of that. We're African first, and so but we cannot belittle our Americanness in the sense of uplifting our black our Africanness. They both can be elevated because we've been raped of a lot of the things that we're trying to recover and heal from anyway. So I think that in our fight and trying to get to the minds and the hearts of the people, we have directed our attention to basically a brick wall, and it is in the youth that the American Negro society failed to capture. Its forward movement couldn't go any further because it failed the youth test. It didn't complete its acceptance of the young mind, not only the autodidact, but the young mind who at the time was starving for something but didn't know how to receive it because they couldn't afford publications or to be in Washington, D.C., or to know some of the things that they knew because they would have to read through newspapers. But you have to remember, there was no press that were really pushing the American Negro Society or any of the organizations. And you can look at learned societies today. We call the Mossi Warrior Clan is a learned society. MBK is a learned society. It's a group of like-minded individuals with a common goal. In order for us to sustain that our way of life, we have to be able to have the economical know-how, or we would have to invest a lot of our money into obtaining information and being able to disseminate that information and put it forth before the people. At some point, we spending money on a bunch of books, right? Outside of doing research on the continent of Africa and the United States, going to museums and things of that nature, and gaining and garnering more information. You know, Satepin Ra doing one of the smartest things in this community very quietly, and don't none of y'all know what he got going on. And when he bring that out, then it's going to be of value to other people who pay attention, because it's going to give you a real life solution to a problem. But he's have to invest his money. Forget the energy that he's putting into this project. It's the money also to be able to maintain it and sustain things to where he can master it and be able to educate others to do what he's doing. So that's why I'm saying that, like, this whole problem or disconnect with us is that we can't get to the actual masses to appeal to them. So if we redirect our focus on trying to present information that is more catchable for our youth, and we expose the youth to this information, I believe we can win in the end and continue to sustain things. That's why you always hear Unc running around talking about, let me get the younger dudes in here. Let me get the younger dudes in here, because he trying to encourage the youth to be more into science and history and things of that nature, so they can form think tanks and be able to solve some of the problems. Because if we're going to consider ourselves to be critical thinkers, then we need to start solving some problems and producing that to the people so that it could be in history, and people can elevate and live off that as well. Like, we sitting here trying to stand on Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, Sean Bird, John G. Jackson, all our great authors, African American authors, and African diaspora authors. We trying to stand on all these great works, but we got to advance them great works, or what they did would be in vain. But man, I'm done talking, man. It's on y'all. Go ahead, Kofi. I know you said you gotta go back and watch it, but I'm sure you got something to say. What's going on tonight?
What you talking to me?
I'm talking to you. I'm talking to another Kofi.
Man, I'm trying to cook, man, and listen at the same time. But
You
no,
can't multitask, man. That's why
yeah,
you
you
burnt.
about
That's
right.
why you burnt the noodles last time.
Nah, man, but great bill though, man. Great bill. Like I said, I missed some of it trying to log in. I'm gonna go back and check it out, man. But great bill. But a lot of us wouldn't even know about those different societies. I know I wouldn't if it wasn't for information.
Hold on. Stop the press. Stop the press. I told him I wasn't gonna do this. But Crumble, now this don't mean nothing to me. This don't mean anything to Satep and Rod. This don't mean anything to Ted. This don't mean anything to Saneb. This don't mean anything to everybody else in the chat. This only mean one thing and one thing only to True Story is that Crumble is from New York. He's from New York. He ended up going to Africa, doing some Liberian work in Africa, establishing some stuff over there. He came back to America. When he came back to America, he ended up staying in Washington, D.C. From there, the quest for the American Negro Society gives birth around like minded individuals that formulated for 32 plus years and then brings us with all the information that we have that come to that. And then we have, like I said, Crick plugging in the autodidactic with the intellectuals or the lettered people in the world. And then we have all these other societies that we lean on that brought our recent ancestors uh, up to par, and they were able to follow in the lead of other learned societies and publish many works, challenge white academia, and continue the legacy of what I say is consciousness. Is that better, Nanny? My bad. Go ahead, Kofi.
Shoot, I forgot what I was saying, man. But anyway, I forgot. Like I said, great bill though, man. I forgot what I was talking about. But
What is going on tonight, Kofi?
check out well, Brother Sutek. I mean, his brother on. Just check out Kofi Pieside TV. Brother Sutek, go into what you gonna be presenting tonight, man, at 6 p.m. Oh, before you even do that, well, yeah, go ahead, and then I'll let the people know what's coming up
Oh,
next week.
okay, peace, family. 6 o'clock Central Time. I will be dealing with the Yoruba. Um, we will be learning about the archaeological, historical, linguistics, all those aspects of the Yoruba. We will be learning about them while answering a question of, do they come from outside of Africa? So I like to answer these questions while learning about the cultures and the people. So that's what we will be doing tonight.
Yeah, so y'all stay tuned, man. 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on Kofi Pieside TV. Tune in, bring your pen and paper. I know I have my pen and paper. Tune in next week. Also, I'll be dropping another article next week, and I'll be dropping presentation on the same day with the article pertaining to the article, but actually it'll be an address to someone on Facebook. It's actually addressed to someone. Someone said I didn't know such a thing about the ancient deity Ra. So I'll be going through our discourse. I don't normally go through a discourse with anybody, but somebody took my picture and put it on their posts. I don't care what nobody else do on their own posts and how ridiculous the information may sound or how ridiculous they may sound. I don't come on their posts and say anything. That's their
So tell me, right, you ain't got nothing, bro?
Nah, man, I'm gonna have to go back and watch it, like Kofi said, because I couldn't get in either. It said forbidden.
I got you. All right. Well, yeah, man. I ain't gonna hold nobody else up, man. I don't know if the hoopla still going on about astral projection, which it probably sure it is, but um, I appreciate
check my
everybody that tuned.
post. About 5 of the chapters out of 8 of the chapters, which 2 of the chapters I'm going to eliminate. And I'm going to go ahead and publish the word out and some new information that's going to be in the unpublished book that is in the article. So I think y'all have check. I mean, I think
You done, Kofi? All right. So again, man, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to the Mossi Warrior Clan YouTube channel. Please, if this is your first time coming across this information, like, share, subscribe. Um, we do our best to try to give you all that we got, man, every day, every week. So again, I just want to thank all y'all for tuning in, man. Y'all take care. Have a good one again. Thank you for hanging out. Mama, that's apricot.